so much for coming to the second in a series of 3 forums on homelessness in Missoula, sponsored by the League of Women Voters. My name is Brenda Desmond, and I just need to say, League of Women Voters, not for women only. There's information about the League of Women Voters on a table in the rear of the room if you're interested. And if anyone wants to talk about the League of Women Voters at 1 o'clock when we're finished, we're happy to talk to you. We'd love to talk to you. All right. We're so fortunate to have a wonderful panel this morning, each of whom has a great deal of expertise in this challenging issue that we face in Missoula and face in so many communities in our country. I'm very optimistic in general, and so I have to be optimistic about our efforts in Missoula to end homelessness, find housing for people that works for them, be more careful about how we do our housing planning so that everyone has access to a home. But the main reason I'm very optimistic is we have people like the people sitting at this table who are working with, and some of you in the audience, who are working with people who are either do not have a home or are at high risk of losing their home. Please help yourself to cookies, coffee, water, or anything else. Okay, the first part of our forum today will be on who are the homeless individuals in shelters and transitional housing. How did they become homeless? What challenges do these homeless individuals face in overcoming homelessness? Then in part 2, we're going to talk about how our speakers have experience in what services can be provided to the people about whom they are speaking. So we will have each of the people sitting here speak, and first we will have Mel Mason, who is the clinical director of the Western Montana Mental Health Center. Then we will have Erin Fowler Pehan, who is the director of the Poverello Center. And finally, we will have Forrest Henning, who is a social worker with the Veterans Administration Clinic here in Missoula. We'll begin with Mel Mason, and we will have time for questions as we go along.
Thank you all for attending. I'm honored to be here and be invited to talk. One of the things as a representative of the Mental Health Center that I always want to talk about when I talk about mental illness is I always want to deal with the issue of stigma. And so I'm going to start from the numbers of people that with mental illness who are not homeless. And then I'm going to work through the presentation in reverse order. When I was thinking about what I was going to say, my memory of the statistics of mental illness in our community was that 9% of our population suffers from serious mental illness. 5% of our population suffers from serious disabling mental illness. In a county the size of Missoula, that means that 5,000 people would suffer from serious disabling mental illness. So I thought I would recheck my statistics and checked with the CDC. The recent statistics are that between 25 and 50% of the population will experience a mental illness or symptoms of a mental illness during their lifetime. And so that means that many people in this group may experience symptoms of mental illness. It is very, very common. Western Montana Mental Health Center serves 1,800 unduplicated persons with mental illness annually. These are, for the most part, probably 95% to 98% of these people are also very low income. Of these folks, only about 13% or 250 people, and those are duplicated numbers, experience homelessness during the year. So we have a vast number of people in our community who experience mental illness and the symptoms of mental illness. and live very normal, ordinary lives, are housed, have families, and are employed in various parts of our community. So what then causes folks with mental illness to experience a situation where they become homeless? Well, first of all, many folks with serious disabling mental illness are extremely low income. And all of the people that we serve are at 150% of poverty or less. That means that they earn $17,000 a year or less. If they're on SSI, social supplemental income, they earn $721 a month. That in and of itself puts people in a very difficult position to obtain housing, because we know that average rental units are $500 to $600 a month. So if you only have $200 of disposable income a month, you're already in dire straits. But the second piece of that is anyone who lives with a chronic disabling medical condition, whether it's mental illness or a medical condition, is at huge risk to experience additional financial difficulties. For many of our folks are on Medicaid, but some are not, and some of the medications run $900 a month. If you make even $1,000 a month, which is over SSI limits and over Medicaid limits, you are faced with, how do I pay for a $900 medication if you don't have health insurance? So these are huge, huge issues for folks with any chronic medical condition. So where did folks live before they were homeless, before an event happened that catapulted them into homelessness? They lived in homes, they lived with families, some people were in hospitals, and many were employed. The range of folks that we see are ages 18 to 80, however old you can still be and live independently in a community. One of the really interesting statistics to me is that the average American is one serious medical event away from homelessness. So anyone who lives with a chronic medical or mental health condition, it is right on that border all the time of facing taking care of your medical condition or being homeless. There were some questions about the incidence in men and women. The incidence of mental illness in men and women is virtually the same. However, the types and presentations of the illnesses are very different. In the incidence of homelessness in people with mental illness, there's probably a 2 out of 3 ratio of men are more homeless, frequently homeless than women. And that's partly because women have a few more family attachment, a few more resources, and that enable them to stay housed for a longer period of time. Brenda has just given me my 1-minute mark, and so I just want to do a little bit of history. Between 1981 and 1983, 500,000 people were disenrolled or lost Social Security benefits. Many of these were people with mental illness. For many of them, it took a year or more to retain their Social Security benefits. This put tens of thousands of people on the street. At the same time, our country is moving towards deinstitutionalization. 40,000 state hospital beds were closed. So that no longer became an option. Some of the things that we're seeing now, they didn't start last year, they didn't start 10 years ago. They started in the 70s and 80s with policy changes, and so I appreciate the League of Women Voters paying attention to this, because this is really vital in terms of our policy making. Thank you.
Thank you.
They're all twisted up. Hi, my name's Erin Fowler. I'm with
with the Poverello Center, and this is a really complicated and complex question, and we have exactly 5 minutes, so I'm going to apologize. It's going to be a very narrow sliver of information. But we do serve homeless individuals, primarily men and women in our shelter, and the question of who becomes homeless, again, is a really complex one. I think 10 years ago, the answer was a bit simpler. It tended to be men between the ages of 45 and 60 who were oftentimes struggling with mental illness, addiction, very frequently were veterans of the Vietnam, even World War II era, and folks that kind of were the rambling man, the people that we picture when we think about homelessness. That picture has changed dramatically in the last 10 to 15 years. We are serving more first-time homeless than we have ever served before, people with college degrees, people with very marketable work experience, but work is not to be had. About 45% of the people that stay in our shelter are employed but underemployed, either working full-time at minimum wage, which we all know in Missoula doesn't afford you the ability to rent even a modest apartment alone, or people working part-time and in need of 2-3 jobs to make ends meet. So our demographic has changed, as have our numbers, and some of the more concerning changes in demographics are the folks on the margins. Our 2 fastest growing population of people entering the shelter are folks who are elderly and trying to make ends meet on Social Security retirement income. We define older homelessness a little bit different than Social Security would define elderly individuals, 65 and up, primarily because there is an unfortunate fact that chronically homeless individuals do not live as long as the general population. Their mortality rate is 4 times higher than the general population, and most folks die before the age of 55 who are chronically homeless. And so we define older homelessness as 50 and above because most of those folks have lived such hard lives that their bodies are more like 70-year-olds, and they're dealing with chronic medical issues that confound that. So folks 50 and above and youth exiting the foster care system are our 2 largest growing populations of people showing up at the shelter. And 2 populations I think that are the most concerning for us because they oftentimes have the most barriers. A lot of the youth exiting the foster care system, many have chosen to drop out of high school who have not completed their GED, which does not make them competitive in a very competitive work environment. And then we're also seeing with a lot of the older homeless individuals we serve a lot of age discrimination in the job market. And so they're struggling to find jobs. And those are our 2 most high-risk populations that we have identified because they tend to stay on average 3 times longer at the shelter than people in that middle age range simply because of those barriers to getting housing and employment. And a few more statistics, a high percentage of the people that we serve have a disability, about 45%. That could be a mental illness, could be recovery from addiction. Oftentimes it's a physical disability, a back injury that has taken them out of the workforce. A lot of folks that are getting into the 50s and 60s that are struggling with COPD, respiratory illness, that makes it very difficult for them to work. And we're also serving increasing numbers of victims of domestic violence that don't meet the criteria for other programs in town. And we see those things as the economy struggles and we see more people falling into poverty. We see things like child abuse, domestic violence increase as stress on families increases. And so we're serving more women that are either leaving abusive relationships and coming to us, or because of the breakdown of a relationship and the loss of financial stability, find their way to the shelter. One unifying factor, a lot of people ask, what's the most common reason that people fall into homelessness? And there is, like I said, there is no common reason anymore. The faces are so very different now and really span across age, across skill level. But what we do see is one unifying factor, and that is the loss of a social safety net. Whether that is by somebody's own decisions, by their own hand, or by factors completely outside of their control, it's that loss of a social safety net to fall back on that leads them to the shelter. I think we all know somebody that may have been homeless, if not for a helping hand from us or from our social systems, whether that's just listening and being available, whether that's helping someone out and paying their rent or paying some medical bills that month so they can make their rent. And that comes in a lot of different capacities, whether it's, our biological family, our extended friends, the faith community, communities around shared interests. And it's folks that don't have that not only fall into homelessness at higher rates, but that struggle to succeed in maintaining housing once they get into housing. And we see a lot of those people gravitating around the Poverello Center as their place of connection, which we really embrace. We do not embrace them leaving housing to come back to us, though. We would like them to stay in housing and come visit us. And so that's a big piece of what we do too, and we'll talk about that later, of rebuilding that community. But we would say that that's kind of the number one theme across all other indicators of risk for homelessness, is that loss of community.
Thank you.
And I might actually try to.
Oh, yes. Before you start, there are some brochures from the Poverello Center, a newsletter, and some information that Ms. Pehan brought. So please help yourself on your way out. All right, Forrest
I'm going to
Henning.
try to untangle this really
I
quickly
know.
because I'm going to step over here. Let's excuse me. Pardon me. Thank you so much. I'll try to place this over here. And I used to teach as an adjunct, and so I oftentimes like to prepare PowerPoints when I speak, and so bear with me here.
Well, we appreciate it.
So again, my name is Forrest Henning. I work at the VA clinic over on Palmer Street. I've been with the VA since 2009, and I want to thank the League of Women Voters and Magistrate Desmond for facilitating this event, as well as the Missoula Public Library and all the other stakeholders here addressing homelessness and raising attention to this. Sorry about that. I'll go ahead and hold this a little bit closer.
Thanks.
All right, and so with respect to part one, kind of talking a little bit about how individuals might find themselves in a situation where they are either at risk of being homeless or are in fact homeless. My co-presenters, I think, stated this very eloquently in stating that it's an extremely complex issue, one that has evolved over the last 2 decades, and in which we're starting to see a much more diverse group of individuals that are either at risk or experiencing homelessness. I identified a couple of traditional conceptualizations, and what we're starting to see at the VA is a shift in that individuals who may have had a very successful military career or had maintained housing after their military service are experiencing certain situations and phenomena that are jeopardizing their housing or leading to homelessness. And I identified some pictures of some service individuals just to emphasize the fact that we're starting to see individuals that really thrived, but due to certain circumstances, whether it be financial, the economy, divorce, or injuries that they've sustained during their military service, such as traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress. All of these things are considered to be significant factors in the trajectory leading to homelessness. On a national level, in 2012, they did kind of a snapshot count to identify the number of veterans who are homeless. And at that time, it was close to 63,000. Here in Montana, our estimates are approximately 250 to 300 homeless veterans, but I want to emphasize that This may be a much smaller number because there are quite a few individuals who are believed to be eligible for VA services, but have not yet enrolled in VA healthcare. And so there's a very strong likelihood that we're not capturing that data. And so that number that I just identified might be smaller than what is actually occurring in the community. This concludes my section on part 1 of this forum, and I'll have a little bit more material for part 2.
Thank you. All right, well now we have about 5 minutes for questions of the panelists and now we are welcoming Michael Moore, who is leading the 10-year plan on homelessness in Missoula as part of the United Way, and he'll be speaking in just a few minutes. But first, does anyone have any questions for the panelists on the issue of who are the people who are homeless? And I think they have stated so well that we can't really fit them all into one category, and that's one of the challenges. Do you have questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
There was a gentleman here who was talking outside the door with one of the League of Women Voter people, and he was saying various things about the way that things are being run and how things are being done, and he did not want to come in and participate. And I explained to him that anybody speaking in this group would be recorded by MTAP, which I'm glad to know because sometimes I did and I didn't know that. And that he would have the chance to participate, but he did not. I do understand to some degree where he's coming from, because he said, why aren't homeless people who have been homeless here and talking? And I think that that's a real good question. And although I don't consider that I've been homeless, I didn't always pay rent or have a roof where I was living. And I did not live on the streets, but I'm in contact with quite a few people who are, and who have traveled, as you call the rambling man, and so forth. So I have some background of knowledge of having lived through it and also being acquainted with a number of people. And I think that that would be a good thing if you could get people to come and talk with you and tell you what happened with them. And they did that about 20 years ago. Some people went to the city council meeting and got up during the city council meeting and spoke. And at that time I had a TV and just happened to have it turned on. I was so proud of them. They came from the Poverello and spoke about their own conditions and about how they had gone. And I thought that was wonderful. That hasn't happened since it was, as far as I know. And I think that's a good thing to communicate with, in both ways with the community, because how do the service agencies and the people who are doing the work know unless people talk to them or unless they've lived it? Yeah, and very few who have lived it are going to be in the positions that you all are. They're still, they're just breathing a sigh of relief being housed or, getting over it or what have you, or older like I am. And resting on my laurels. Thank you.
Yes, you make an excellent point, and I'm glad you spoke up for the gentleman about this issue.
Yeah.
This was mentioned at our first panel, and my recollection is that, of course, the answer was yes, we need people who are not housed participating in this discussion. My recollection is that in our third panel, we are going to do that, and I'll let Mr. Moore address this later, but I know that in the 10-year plan, strong efforts are being made to involve people who do not have homes or who are at risk of becoming homeless to participate in that plan. So I'll let him talk about that. But of course you're right. You need to have everyone at the table who has something to contribute to the discussion, and who has more to contribute than people who are insecure with their home or have no home at all. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
And I know that Erin would agree, but at least for the, that's good enough, I can sit closer to Forrest. while this is a public forum, and I think that there's value in what you said in terms of having formerly homeless people talk, we have no shortage of information from people who've been homeless about their situations, because we still see them quite regularly. You know, I know Erin probably has POV graduates that are not foreign to her anymore, and I see people on a routine basis that have been homeless, and I think we really have quite a bit of information from them about their experiences and what helped them move beyond that short-term experience.
I think we have another comment.
Okay, and I would just add one
yes,
really
please
quick
do.
thing.
Yes.
I think something that's really exciting too, through some changes at the federal level with our funders, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, is the new HEART Act, which manages homeless funding, is going to mandate that organizations receiving funding have a formerly homeless person on their board of directors, and I think that that's really important. So even funding sources are moving in the right direction with that.
Yes, comment or question?
Question. What kinds of things do you do presently to get homeless people into housing?
That moves us right into our the second portion of the program. I'll first have, Michael Moore is going to speak first, and so I'll pass the microphone to him.
Okay.
It's 8 minutes, I'm not sure what qualifies for that.
Do you want to stand over here? Or
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe I'll just sit over there.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. We just want to make sure it's amplified so everyone can
Yeah,
hear.
for NCAP, that's good.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry to be tardy, but I had to go over to the school district where all their family resource officers were meeting today, and we were talking a little bit about how to better integrate the kind of information they get, and get that information to service providers in maybe in a more streamlined fashion. But kind of the underlying theme there is that, you know, we have this huge diverse population of people that have some sort of singular needs in that they lack housing, but then have a lot of divergent needs in where could you house that person? Is it just because they lack a job? Is it because they've had a medical issue? Is it because they're mentally ill? Is it because the dad of their family ran off and left? So those people, they all create different challenges. So, but in terms of your question directly, Reaching Home is not a service provider. It's essentially a sort of a government required plan to do better with the homeless resources that we have in our community. What it can do though is to help us find a way to sort of pull off to 10,000 feet and say, hey, look, we're doing X here, and we're doing Y there, and we're doing Z over there, and all those things are interconnected, but the people that are running those programs are overwhelmed, and they can only do X. They can't find a way to link up with Y and Z. So my job is to be that person that's sort of the 10,000 foot pull off that can help sort of orchestrate and coordinate all these efforts. Unfortunately, we haven't been handed a Harry Potter wand or any other magic potion by which we can bestow housing on everybody. And we certainly haven't been handed a huge new pot of money that would make that, I mean, if somebody showed up and said, here's $1 million, I think we could probably house about 80% of homeless people like by next week. Unfortunately, we don't have that. What we do have this year that we haven't had in the past is about $200,000 for short to medium term rental assistance. These are programs that we haven't historically had in the past. And this is a move toward what Reaching Home and other homeless plans around the country is using, which is called a housing first model, sometimes also referred to as rapid rehousing. But the idea is, instead of running people through emergency shelters and then transitional programs, that we're going to put them straight into housing. So we have, again, $200,000 that's dedicated for that sort of help. The first of that money went to Word, $50,000, which they got a couple of months ago. I spoke with their caseworker on that, and she has spent about between $15,000 and $20,000 of that money in the first couple of months, and she has about 20 families that are either housed or in the process of being housed. So you can kind of run the math on that. We're holding back on the rest of that money to see how these people do and whether we might need to help them a little bit more as they move on through this rental period. This is money that in theory will be used in a 4 to 6 month period to help people out. We're reserving some of it to help people for a little bit in the 6 to 12 month period if they were to have a short-term problem. Around the country, programs like this are succeeding at about an 80% rate at people still being in housing a year later. Although the transitional programs that Missoula has had historically have been very effective, nationwide they haven't been very effective, and they often keep people in housing at less than a 50% rate a year later. Our own program that was run through the Poverello, the Joseph residents, I believe Erin has had a number of 90%. That's an aberration, and it's an aberration of which we can be proud of, I think, in our community, and it owes to the kind of people that do the work at the POV. But nationwide, programs that are shorter term seem to be more helpful. That's a little bit counterintuitive, but there's one psychological study that shows that because these programs require people to buy in a little bit, they have to put in part of their own money for the rent in the later parts of the period that they're being assisted. That buy-in seems to be a critical factor in why they stay in the housing. In that, in a lot of other cases, everything was provided to them, and now they're having to pay $100 this month and maybe $200 next month and $300 by the 6th month. And the fact that they've spent $700 of their own money makes them less inclined to bail out. So Missoula, we are in our first go round with this, and so we don't have numbers to say whether we'll succeed or not in that direction, but the evidence looks good on a nationwide basis, and I certainly don't see any reason why we would veer from that, because I know the people that are running the programs here in Missoula, and they're top-notch people. So I think it's really more important today to have these guys talk about what they do in their program. So I'm going to move away and cede everybody else an extra minute for their programs, because it's really, like I said, Reaching Home is an effort to sort of bring people together to do a better job. It's not a magic potion, and it doesn't come with a big pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So the people that have always been housing homeless people in this community, they're still the people that are housing those people. My job is to help them find a better, more streamlined way to do that, and in the end, try to find additional resources. That's going to be a long, hard search, and I'm glad it's a 10-year plan to end homelessness and not a 2-year plan, because we'll need every day. But we are off to a good start. The plan has goals for the first 3 years, and we have made significant progress on all of those goals in the first 8 months. So let's hear from the folks who are actually doing the work.
All right, thank you. Ms. Mason.
Thanks, Brenda. The vast majority of the work that we do is to provide mental health care, and that acts more as a preventative than an actual assisting to house people. If you can keep people in receipt of mental health care or of any medical care, and if you can keep them in receipt of benefits that give them a monthly income, you can do a great deal to prevent homelessness. But and to that end, we have medication services, therapy services, case management services, crisis house services. But the second tier then is our Path Outreach program, and Teresa's in the audience. She's our Path Outreach coordinator. But that team actually works to identify folks in the community who are not in services, who are homeless and experiencing a mental illness, and to encourage and assist those folks both to obtain mental health treatment and to obtain housing. The third tier of support that we have is we have actual housing. We have 2 7-bed therapeutic residential facilities. One is a co-ed facility, one is a facility for women only that is in Stevensville. We have a 20-unit apartment building called the Bridge Apartments. It only accepts people who are homeless and suffering from a mental illness and in treatment with us. We also have a 4-plex. We have 4 condos that we currently have all filled, but where the mental health center actually assists someone to purchase a condominium, and at some point in the future, if they sell, then they benefit from the proceeds if it exceeds their original purchase price and the amount remaining on the condo. We're currently in the process of building another 8-plex. We purchased property. We have some CDBG grant money. That's a mouthful. And so we're working to build another unit. So all of those are permanent. Once someone is housed, the group homes are transitional, but the actual residences are permanent housing. So once people obtain that housing, they're able to stay in it. So as a result, it's kind of tip of the iceberg in terms of really housing people, but I think the resulting impact is some very challenging situations that people have been faced with. They are then able to have the guarantee of a long-term residence with mental health treatment and support. So those are kind of the programs that we offer.
Thank you.
Well, we offer a pretty broad continuum of services for individuals who become homeless at the Poverello Center, but perhaps the most well-known service is our emergency facility, which is currently located on Ryman Street. The emergency facility serves men and women for overnight services and provides day services and meal services to families as well. Pre-2009, we're sleeping about 50 people a night. Now we sleep about 110 individuals per night. And really, we act as a safety net for the community so that individuals who fall into homelessness have a place to go where they can get their basic needs met and they can get access to referrals or on-site services that they need to get back on their feet. A lot of people ask us why we're building a new facility in the height of our 10-year planning process, when really what we all know is that housing is the only true solution to homelessness. And the very easy answer to that is that there will always be homelessness at some level in our community. It is a 10-year plan to end homelessness. I call it the 10-year plan to make homelessness the shortest amount of time possible and prevent it when, if at all possible. Because I feel like that's a little bit more true to the goal and manageable for our community. Every community sees homelessness at a rate of about 0.07% of their general population. We're all seeing a bit more than that now with the current economic climate. And with the growth of Missoula, we will keep seeing people that fall into homelessness. And so we're going to hit it hard from the prevention end as a community. But then we need to have a safety net for folks who do find themselves evicted on a Friday night, or who get kicked out of their apartment, have to leave an abusive relationship, leave a situation that no longer works for them. So our goal and kind of our role within the 10-year plan is to build a facility that is incredibly dignified and safe and effective in shortening the length of time for folks who become homeless. Right now, the average length of stay at the Poverello Center is about 60 days. We'd like folks to be with us for less than 20. A short period of time where we can assess their needs, refer them to all the amazing providers that Michael mentioned in Missoula who are doing great work around vocational training, employment, removing barriers to housing, and get those folks in a better situation, which may be a transitional living group home situation with the mental health center. It may be directly into housing of their own. So the POV should only ever be a very short stop for people, but it is a necessary component in our community to make sure that we don't have people literally dying on the street in the coldest winter months. In addition to our basic services, food and shelter that we provide, we have a plethora of day services. Things as simple as helping people get access to what we call the building blocks that they need to go to the SNAP office and apply for food stamps. Sometimes the people we serve, especially the more chronically homeless people we serve who've been on the streets for years, oftentimes even decades, don't have a photo ID, don't have a birth certificate, have no way to access those documents. We've even served a handful of folks who have no idea what their true legal name is. They've gone by a street name, they've been homeless living in camps with their families since the age of 6. They have no record, they don't exist in the system, and so it takes a long time for us to build those records. Track school transcripts in Mississippi, one very unique case, our amazing nurse at Partnership Health Center was able to find someone's true identity through dental records, and so we get very creative, but sometimes things like that really are the first step and they can take a long time, and so we help folks get those building blocks in place, make connections in the community with mental health, the Veterans Administration, places that can provide support to them. And then we also have outreach teams, which are newly formed and I think one incredibly effective way to reach out specifically to the chronically homeless population. Folks who don't stay at the POV because it's crowded, because maybe they're struggling with mental illness or an addiction. A lot of veterans dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injuries, that those close confines are not comfortable and don't feel safe to them. So we go to where folks are, whether that's an encampment, whether that's in their car, and our primary goal is to build relationship. And once we build that relationship, we work to encourage people to come back into the service delivery system where we can help them access all of the programs and supports that Missoula has to offer.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to try this one more time.
Okay.
Hopefully.
All right.
Would you like to sit here for us?
No, actually,
Yeah.
All right.
yeah, I've got a PowerPoint, and we'll see if I can deliver a little more information. Give me just a moment here to set this up. Let's see, how about from current slide? Okay. So basically in the VA, there was a significant shift in how homelessness was recognized as a priority to address. And on the slide, it basically describes how this initiative was formed and the two champions of these efforts and programs to address homelessness with veterans. And basically they had a very ambitious goal of ending veteran homelessness by the end of 2015. And again, I think that Erin really described a more realistic goal, that if we could perhaps reduce the time that a person experiences that would be a more realistic goal. And again, these services are designed to target individuals that are either homeless at the time or at risk of being homeless. With respect to some statistics, to describe some of the efforts launched by this initiative, it describes a reduction in the number of homeless veterans by almost 20%. As a result of this success, the VA decided to enhance and expand its funding to assist homeless veterans and at-risk veterans. And it talks about basically the funding that is planned to address and devote dollars to endeavor to this end. With respect to some of the factors, and this might have been a good slide for the first section, but these are factors that are very common that were identified by the panel, including poverty. Again, Erin mentioned earlier, you know, if there's a separation or a termination of some type of social support system, that can be the precipitating event that leads to homelessness. In addition, we also see things like substance use disorders or mental illness that can certainly contribute to the trajectory of homelessness, as well as individuals that might experience trauma during their military service. At this time, the VA is attempting to target its efforts to identify and address the needs of individuals that are considered chronically homeless. Typically, this is defined as being homeless without a safe place for habitation for 1 year, or 4 episodes of homelessness within 3 years. This is the typical definition that we use. In addition to these targeted efforts to address the needs of the chronically homeless are veterans with a disability, as well as veteran families that have dependent children. In addition to this population, we also are targeting efforts to address the needs of veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as women veterans. All of these subpopulations are considered to be a significant priority to which we are to address our focus and efforts on. As far as some of the program types that the VA offers at this time to address the needs of homelessness, it involves public awareness and public service announcements. I did have a hyperlink to a YouTube video, but I'll encourage viewers as well as audience members to check this out. If you Google homeless veterans and you click on the video section, it'll lead you to this, and it's basically a public service announcement which has been nationally televised as well. In addition, we also offer that continuum of services, which Erin really described nicely, I think, as far as services ranging from those emergency shelter services to permanent housing. We in the VA certainly don't operate in a vacuum, and I think that we are very, very, very fortunate to be in a community in which we have such amazing stakeholders and such amazing resources, including the Poverello Center, who we partner with very closely to provide emergency shelter services to veterans. In addition to this particular service, we also have the health care for homeless veterans. And as you can see, this is an evolving program in which they are somewhat of a point of contact or point of entry into the homeless veterans programs. In addition to the emergency shelter services and the health care for the homeless veterans services, we also have a grant and per diem program. Grant and per diem programs are designed to be transitional housing. Oftentimes, this might range from a 3-month stay to a 24-month stay. Here in Missoula, those dollars are used to fund and maintain Fowler House, which is a 17-bed program designed to provide transitional housing to homeless veterans. And there's also expansion efforts with the Poverello to provide these grant per diem transitional housing opportunities. The last program that I wanted to talk about is the HUD-VASH program, which I'm more involved with here in Missoula. And this is an acronym standing for the Housing and Urban Development VA Supported Housing Program. The HUD-VASH program is basically a voucher program that is similar to Section 8 vouchers, if anybody's familiar with these. And it basically provides a veteran or a veteran family with a voucher that they can present to a landlord and obtain and secure and maintain housing at a very affordable rate. Oftentimes this is 1/3 of an individual's income, and then they also factor in things like medical expenses, child care expenses, in order to offset the cost of that rent to make permanent housing accessible for veterans. Currently, in this particular community and in our immediate surrounding area, we have approximately 60 vouchered veterans or veteran families. And again, this is a very diverse group, ranging from both male and female service individuals who served in a variety of branches, capacity, and circumstances. And again, there is no prototypical situation or set of circumstances that leads to homelessness. As far as challenges, barriers, and obstacles, one of the things that I encounter in the HUD-VASH program are things like the lack of a rental history, credit history, if a person experienced some legal difficulties, or if they are in between jobs or experiencing a disabling condition that prevents them from work. These can all be significant barriers in enabling a vouchered veteran to obtain housing. Fortunately, some of the other community stakeholders, including WORD, which was mentioned earlier by Michael, have been a tremendous resource for homeless veterans in that they have been able to access certain things like a security deposit or first month's rent. These are the very things that can sometimes prevent that person who has a voucher in their hand from accessing and maintaining and sustaining permanent housing. With respect to how the VA's efforts are congruent with the 10-year plan, we also have identified prevention and rapid rehousing as being a significant component. And then also this notion of housing first, which is basically reconceptualizing how we look at and think about the services that we provide to individuals who are homeless or at risk of being homeless. And basically this concept, as well as the research that has been tracking it, has demonstrated that individuals who are provided with permanent housing oftentimes achieve better outcomes for both themselves, their families, as well as the communities that they reside in. Again, there's also concentrated efforts to serve the chronically homeless as defined by the McKinney-Vento Act, which I described earlier with the 4 episodes of homelessness or 1 year of homelessness. Again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters and the rest of the community stakeholders for this opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Forrest. Any questions or comments? Ms. Greenwood.
Thank you all. I mean, that's very helpful information, and it's always good to be in a public forum and have people talking about issues that we don't necessarily talk about every day. So before I make my comment, though, I want to disclose that I work for Missoula Housing Authority, although I'm here on my lunch break. I am not being paid, and I'm going to just speak as a member of the community. And I've lived in Missoula for about 23 years now and done various different kinds of work. But it is from my experience as a service coordinator in public housing, which in MHA we refer to public housing as actually the housing that we own and operate and manage. And so I don't work with people who have vouchers. I just work with people who are actually in our buildings. So I just want to mention 3 barriers that I didn't hear mentioned here that I think intersect well with the Women's League of Voters, in that they are voting type issues. Mm-hmm. Well, the first one isn't. Okay, so I just want to let people know that this is complicated, and part of what's complicated about it is keeping people housed once they're housed. I mean, it's way complicated having enough housing, but keeping people housed and keeping them from being evicted or from losing their housing is complicated too. And I just want to mention a couple of scenarios that came up for me this week where people who don't read well or don't read at all and have very low literacy levels are also the people who we see in housing for very low income people who missed out on opportunities to either get a good education or people who, because of disabilities, weren't able to access that education. So people don't open their mail from the housing authority. And what all the people on the panel could do, and many people here in the audience can do to support those folks, is really get them to open their mail so that they don't lose out on an opportunity. So we send out a letter, for example, every year where we are purging our list at Missoula Housing Authority to make sure that people on the list are really still living in the community. But if you don't open the letter, you can't respond and you can't call the housing authority and say you still want to be on the list. So the second issue that I didn't really hear mentioned, and that's because it's just such a broad issue, is we have a severe need in Missoula for one-bedroom units. So when people decide they want to build affordable housing and they want to be investors in tax credit housing through the Department of Commerce, or they're building housing through HUD, I really hope that people who are out there voting for administrations and policy-oriented folks really bring that issue to the fore, because it's not actually just an issue in Missoula, it's an issue that has to do with the demographics of the country to begin with. We have a lot of elderly people who end up alone at the end of their lives, and they need one-bedroom apartments. As we find also in the homeless population, people often prefer to, once they get housing, to live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. So keep that in mind when we're thinking about development. And then the last issue that I just want to bring to people's attention in terms of a policy issue is, maybe because I work at the Housing Authority and that's all we hear about is news from HUD, right? HUD is our best friend and our most irritating partner. But what you hear from HUD is that eventually they're going to eliminate public housing. Okay, well, you know, maybe that doesn't sound horrible. Well, it is horrible. But not only that, on the next level up from horrible, it seems to me that HUD has this idea and this concept that isn't evidence-based, which is that we're going to give everyone who's in public housing those buildings that we own and operate, which we do very well here in Missoula, but maybe they can't do as well in Chicago. But the buildings that we actually own, we're going to take those people out of those buildings and we're going to give them a voucher, a Section 8 voucher. And there are a lot of people who would have a very hard time working with a voucher. You can probably attest to that. You can give them a VASH voucher, but that doesn't guarantee success. And you can't necessarily think that by eliminating public housing and just giving everyone a Section 8 voucher that the problem is going to be solved. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to do a little community room therapy. But those are kind of the issues that I feel are really present in housing at this time.
Those are excellent comments, and there are good people here to hear them. Someone else had a question. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I just want to thank you all for an awesome presentation. And I like the fact that you bring a point about the stigma and not classifying people when you bring up the word individual. And I don't know really too many of the panelists. I've met Michael before because I went through a period of homelessness and know what it's like, and I still work with those places because I volunteer in those places. So my question is just like, what do you want from us as guests, you the panelists? I mean, you brought this meeting together to bring some awareness, but what do you want from us as like the attendees?
On behalf of the League, I will say the League of Women Voters wants people to be engaged in this challenge, and in particular, in the challenge that the Reaching Home program is working on. This is why we decided the League of Women Voters generally has educational programs that also promote conversation based on information. And that's what the League of Women Voters wants. The people at the table, let's see what they want. That's a good question.
That actually was one of our questions, or at least on mine, and so I did give it a little bit of thought. But I think the main, there are probably 4 points. One is to come and take an interest and be educated about the things that happen in your community and make decisions based on that. And then to vote and to vote your conscience on those issues, I think that's critically important. And of course, the two issues that I promote are really issues about affordable housing and issues about affordable medical care. And I think those two issues are just critical to helping folks that are vulnerable and might fall through the cracks. And that could be any of us. As I pointed out earlier, any of us can be one serious medical event away from homelessness, because you're unable to work and you're unable to pay your bills and you have extensive medical debt, and it's that creates a perfect storm for any of us. But thank you for asking that.
I think it's really important to stay involved at an intellectual level and to understand the issues and the policies, but I also think that our goal when we talk to anyone about the services that we provide and the folks that we serve is to encourage them to engage in more of a human way, at a human level. And you know, I gave a tour to a young single mother the other day who was in the psychology program at the university, and she was just really blown away and emotionally affected by the state of the building and the folks that she met. And she said, I need to do something. I want to do something. I don't have any money to give you, and I don't have any time to volunteer, and I can't do anything. And she was like paralyzed with the sense that she wasn't doing anything. And I said, there are a million things you can do. You know, you're a mom, talk to your kids about this. You know, educate them about what it's like to be homeless and the individual nature of it. Next time you walk by someone who is on the street, who is homeless, say hi, look at them, you know, introduce yourself, ask them what their name is. And I think sometimes it's that human connection that folks who are living on the street lack the most. And so even when we have little time and no money to share, there are such impactful ways that we can engage in the issue, not just on the intellectual level and policy level, which is so very important because that's really, we know where decisions get made, but on the human level and helping, just reminding that one person that day that I see you, you have a name, you matter to me, you're not just a person I'm walking by, and to engage in that level too, because I think that we lose sight sometimes of the actual people who are struggling when we're focusing on changing the policies that create the struggle.
I feel like Mel and Erin really stated those responses well, and I would just like to include everything that they just said without repeating it. But I also think, you know, just by attending a forum such as this, you know, taking the time to, you know, try to understand this particular issue, to try to, you know, put this on a level where it's not just, you know, something that is, you know, considered, you know, from time to time, but to, you know, to consider ways to not only, you know, enhance your understanding of this, but to also reduce stigmatization, I think, about homelessness. And I think also being mindful and aware of policymakers and how those policies might be formed and how those policies might be funded. I think that's an extremely important component. And so we're so fortunate to have the League of Women Voters to hold this forum.
Yeah, well, ditto to what they all said, and I would have harped on the individual, the act that you can take, that sort of the personal greeting, the saying the person's name. You know, every year we run a thing called Project Homeless Connect, and it's a one-day event where people can come and get a wide variety of services. And yet the thing that people routinely say that was the most important part of that was that they had an advocate and a person who stayed with them the whole time and listened to their story, or, you know, just provided a kind ear to them. And any of you can do that starting later today. But she already said that. What I want you to do is go out, get the phone number of your congressional representatives, get the phone numbers of your state legislators, and call them up and say, look, we're talking about the most vulnerable people in our society, And we're trying to fix their situation with baling wire and twine and spit. We are the richest country in the world, and we do a miserable job taking care of the people who need the most care. Last 2 weeks ago, I spoke to CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocates. That's an organization that helps kids who are maybe being taken away from their parents, but they are in a custody conflict situation. And you know who represents those people? The kids. Everybody else has a lawyer, and the kids have a volunteer. That's who we are as a country. The person that has the least and has the least ability to help him or herself is helped by a volunteer. We need to conk some people over the head with that at higher levels. And I would prefer that we did that in a ballot box and by our own personal lobbying, but frankly, if I had a hammer, I'd look for something to hit.
They're great volunteers, though.
They are? Well, they
They are.
are. But is that who we want to be?
Yeah.
I mean, honest to God.
I'm going to have to end the panel because we said it would only be an hour and people have places to go. But if people on the panel can stay and answer questions and continue the discussion, I would urge them to do so. But first, let's give a big round of applause for this fabulous panel.